I want everyone to be able to teach the 3-minute game, to be able to lead other people through it. So in this video, I'm going to try and help you teach or lead your partner through the game. So there are 4 different roles or quadrants within the wheel of consent that we're going to walk through. And they are distinguished through asking 4 questions. There's many different ways you can lead this game. I'm going to lead it with 4 questions. How do I want to touch you for my pleasure? That puts me in the take quadrant and you in the allow quadrant. How do you want to touch me for your pleasure? That puts you in take and me in allow. How do I want you to touch me for my pleasure? That puts me in accepting your service. And how do you want me to touch you for your pleasure? That puts you in accept and me in serve. Now we're going to help you understand what each quadrant is, how to stay in each quadrant, because it's very easy to slip out of one of them and into another, and what actually distinguishes each from the other. So our language and how we describe the dynamic of what's happening is really important in creating the visceral experience and polarity within each quadrant, okay? So I want you to be mindful that there's a reason why we are using certain language, okay? It's not to say that you have to use this language, but that just notice how the language changes the quality of what you experience. As a for instance, if I'm calling it lust or passion or desire or playfulness, those are different feelings, right? So the most important question that delineates one quadrant from the other is, who is this touch for? So you'll notice that I was using for your pleasure or for my pleasure. So we're being explicit in when we're touching the other person. Am I touching you for your pleasure, or am I touching you for my pleasure? Now that gets confusing sometimes, because what comes up when you turn this concept into an embodied experience, which is the most important part, is, well, what if we're both getting pleasure from the experience? Because that's going to happen a lot, and that's great. What we want to focus on in this game as a practice to build intimacy, to develop pathways of pleasure, is oftentimes in our hands, we're so used to giving pleasure through our hands that we don't know what it's like to actually take in, as if there's an energy coming into me versus coming out of my hands. Okay? Now this is really important to open up the take quadrant for us. So when we are in take but not in consent, that's abuse, which is why it is an edgier quadrant. Okay? So I like to use the example of, if I'm giving you a massage, or more objectively, if my hands are rubbing your shoulders and a third-party person is watching, they're traditionally going to think that I'm touching you for your pleasure. But Betty Martin distinguishes a different way that we can give and receive than we're normally aware of, which is, I could be doing that same action, but if the question is who it's for is for me, now I'm taking pleasure in you and I'm actually receiving the gift. Versus in the traditional massage dynamic, the person being touched is receiving the gift. So if we think of giving and receiving as the exchange of a gift, then in the take quadrant, I'm touching you and I'm receiving a gift. So the directionality of the pleasure is going this way, but who's being done to? It's you. So the arrows are going in two different directions. Now in the allow quadrant, which is the opposite of the take quadrant, you are also giving in a different way than we normally give. Because normally the person giving is the one doing the action, right? But in allow, the gift that I'm giving is actually access to me. So I've consented, if you wish, right? You never have to consent, to allow the person to do to me, to touch me, to use my body for their pleasure. And that gets really hot when we're in consent. Not hot when we're not in consent, which is why negotiation is the most important aspect of this game, and we could say in intimacy and touch play in general. Now, the implications of this game also extend far beyond touch and intimacy in the bedroom. You'll start to see, as you have these experiences, that it's going to broaden your awareness in general of, well, what do I want? How do I operate in my desire in the world? What am I scared of? What's the fear connected to some of the desires that aren't getting satisfied? And then how do I also walk in the world as a boundaried person, which means connected to myself and my values, my self-respect, my self-esteem, because boundaries extend out of that, but then also be open to regulating closeness and distance, which is what we do with boundaries, which is what keeps me safe in the world. So what's most important here is that we practice this game over and over and over and over and over again, so that we learn something new every time. And I continue to learn something new every time. Now, it's called the 3-minute game because we divide up being in each quadrant for 3 minutes. You can choose whatever time you wish. It is nice to have a small amount of time to start and to make sure that you use 3 minutes in each of the quadrants equally. If you're really enjoying some of the touch you're experiencing, when the timer goes off, still bring it to a close. Always bring it to a close. Finish the entire game, debrief after each round, and then you can continue doing the fun thing that you discovered or were into, right? So the game provides us with parameters or a container so that we can learn, right? Because different things are going to come up in you, and you're going to notice a propensity to be pulled towards habits and conditioning and to dilute the polarity of the dynamic. So in other words, when I'm in take, it's pretty easy to make a request. Let's say I make a request to touch your bum, and I'm touching your bum, and suddenly I get into pleasuring you for your pleasure. But if I'm in take, I'm supposed to be taking in pleasure through my hands, and you're supposed to be just allowing me to touch you. Similarly, in the allow quadrant, you could start to move a lot and really get into it for your pleasure. But that's not the quadrant you're in. You're in allowing me to touch you for my pleasure. So what's it like to relax, release, not do, and give through access? And that's just one example of the nuance that we start to get into in this game. So as you learn to teach the game and learn this game in a deeper way, what I want you to focus on is actually being able to describe what puts you in each quadrant and then pair that with the embodied felt sense experience so that you can also explain it to someone else who has no idea what the game is. And when you're able to do that, then that means you're really starting to take it in on all levels, right? When you can easily distinguish which is which and guide someone else through the nuances of the experience.